Welcome to another edition of Impact TV. I'm Kevin Hilton, the CEO of Impact. Today, again, the topic is safety, which is more important to ironworkers and their contractors than any other topic we'll discuss. Today, we delve into the issue of getting the newest hire to take safety as importantly as the most seasoned veteran. And how can you do that if the highest levels of the contractor leadership don't believe in it? Today, we have General President Walt Wise, along with Executive Director of Safety and Health Steve Rank, and Jim Stanley of FDR Safety to address this very, very important topic. So before we get to Steve and Jim, let me turn it over to Walt Wise for a word on this issue.
Our commitment to safety has significantly reduced job site fatalities and incidents, but we cannot be satisfied until we reach zero. Only zero enables every ironworker to return home safely every day. Only zero protects our families from the tragedy and hardship of a workplace injury. And only zero lives up to our personal responsibility to each other. After reviewing incident trends and causation factors for many years, we have identified several areas where our local unions and contractors must collectively work together to improve workplace safety performance. This safety webcast series, titled Establishing Safety Programs and Policies as a Function of Company Operations, is a continuation of our Zero Incident campaign that will be offered to local unions and contractors on a periodic basis. Today's webcast will highlight some of the fundamental safety issues, procedures, and requirements that must be addressed to improve workplace safety performance. Workplace safety is everyone's responsibility, from the new apprentice to seasoned journeyman to contractor supervision and owners. Your training is designed to enable you to recognize potential hazards, and your union stands behind you to see that standards are enforced. But it is you who must say something when you see something. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Please pay close attention to the topics of this very important series because we all have the same goal: zero. Zero incidents, zero injuries, and zero fatalities. And as we work together, zero will be reached.
Welcome. My name is Steve Rank. I'm Executive Director of Safety and Health for the Ironworkers International Union. And with me today is Jim Stanley of FDR Safety. A little bit on Jim's background. Jim is formerly the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Labor, OSHA. Jim was with the Ironworkers many years ago when we revised the Subpart R steel erection standard, and he knows our industry very well. Today, Jim works on various projects around the United States and around the world, in fact, on safety issues, and works with our contractors and members throughout the country. Jim also, many years ago, during the revision of the safety standards for the ironworkers, brought to the table 673 fatalities. We looked at the causation factors of those fatalities, and we were able to write new standards to protect our members, and we have seen a dramatic decrease in incidents and fatalities in many areas. However, we're here today to talk about another set of issues and items pertaining to establishing safety programs and policies as a function of company operations. There's been a common thread in incident trends and fatalities, and we boiled it down into some major areas, and that's the focus of this webcast series, is for you to understand where we can do better, both from a local union standpoint as well as a contractor. So Jim, establishing safety programs and policies as a function of company operations in today's environment, what happens if you don't do this?
Well, your business is in jeopardy. You have to have a site-specific safety program for every project you're involved in. It just goes without saying. It's essential that in today's world, the regulatory world that we're facing today, and everybody knows everything that you are doing, you have to have a program that deals with the safety and health issues at your workplace. And it can't be something off the shelf. It can't be somebody else's program where you just put your name on it. It really has to be site specific. And if you follow that program and you have top management enforcing that program and you have a working relationship with your workers in dealing with the important issues that they face every day, you're going to be well on your way of establishing a great program.
Jim, we've had a problem with cookbook safety programs, and you know what those are. I see them as programs where maybe a contractor got them from an insurance broker or representative or a safety consultant, and these big safety programs are just sitting on the corner of the desk collecting dust. They're not being implemented. So tell me a little bit of problems with contractors that have programs that are not being implemented.
Well, of course, OSHA has minimum standards, and they are the standard of care. When we go on to, when a workforce goes to work, they look to OSHA for guidelines on safety and health. But then OSHA looks at the contractors to say, have you established your own programs that meet ours and maybe even exceed ours? So when there's an issue, they go back to the contractor safety program, and if it isn't addressing it, or if it is addressing it, and it's laid out in your program, but you're not doing anything about it, you got a tough road to follow at that point on with the agency.
So what would you say to a contractor out there that has a big, thick cookbook safety program and is not implementing or addressing several items in there? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say you need to rethink the way you're doing business. It is not that difficult to, the corporations, let me just stop there and say, the corporations, the companies, they have corporate policies that establish general rules and ways to operate safely, and that's good. But then when we get to an individual site, you have to have a specific program that deals with the issues that you're facing. And we know in construction, every day is different. Every issue is different, and everything changes all the time. You have to be able to address those.
Those saying you better be careful what you put in writing because it can be held against you. How does that work with the Department of Labor?
Well, certainly when a compliance officer, and I used to be a compliance officer, when they're out there looking at an issue, they try to back up their findings with knowledge of the employer. And if they go into the program and it's there and you're not doing it, or it's not there and you should have been doing it, they're establishing the violations, and you have a problem. And then going forward, it's after an incident occurs, or if there's problems on the work site, it's just a slippery slope. You got to have good programs, and once you say it, you have to do it.
Jim, you deal a lot with contractors that are trying to get qualified for certain projects. So going into these type of situations, what's the most important thing in preparation for bidding on a job that a contractor needs to have in place?
Again, we go back to, in today's world, you're not going to be successful bidder if you don't have a world-class program on many projects. You're just not going to get the chance to bid. So you have to be able to prove to the owners and to the construction managers that you understand what your responsibilities are, and you're willing to do the right thing all the time, even if nobody's watching you.
Very good. Well said. So today's webcast covers all the disciplines of our industry, such as steel erection activities, reinforcing steel and post-tensioning, which, by the way, these disciplines are under different standards. And Jim, there's been a lot of confusion to some of our members. One day they could be setting concrete for a steel erector, precast concrete, and the next day they could be setting steel erection. But it's true that they're under two different standards. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. Subpart R deals with steel erection activities, and the precast standard, for instance, the fall protection situation And requirements in Subpart R are different than what's required in precast erection, and maybe even more strict. So you have to be familiar with the regulations, the standards, and you also have to be aware of where you are in this country. There's state plan OSHA, there's federal OSHA, and some state plans are more restrictive. And so you have to be aware exactly what you are required to do at a minimum.
Good. We'll also be talking, this also applies to crane assembly and disassembly. And once again, we're under crane standard when it comes to this discipline. But many of our contractors and ironworkers assemble and disassemble cranes every day around the United States and Canada. And there are very specific requirements for this discipline, and our members and contractors need to know it and need to implement it. Also, exterior curtain wall systems, or we call miscellaneous iron, ornamental iron. We work out of aerial lift equipment. So this is a different discipline that we do. So everything that we talk today talks about these issues, as well as tower erection. We have ironworker contractors and members that erect guide towers and flare towers all across the country as well as the world. And so they're under different standards and they have different hazards, and these are things that must be addressed before they show up to build the project or erecting a tower. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. And for instance, in tower erection, we are erecting steel, so Subpart R applies, but there are other standards within the construction standard that would also apply here, and you just have to be knowledgeable about it. Then company management has to have, again, a site-specific program to deal with all these issues.
That's correct. We also have ironworkers that work in the shop to do shop fabrication, and this falls under the OSHA general industry safety orders. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference between construction and general industry.
Well, as everybody probably realizes that's watching this webcast, general industry standards in many cases are entirely different than what's required in construction. We have a fixed location with repetitive operations, unlike construction, which is a mobile location. It moves. Everything on the job site as you're building something differs. Now in shop fabrication, you have an overhead crane standard, different than, not even in the construction standard. You have different fall protection requirements. You're at 4 feet in shop fabrication. You're at 6 feet, or in Subpart R at 15 feet, and that differs. So you just have to be, again, where you are and what is required of you, and be able to deal with that.
There's no one-size-fits-all, is there, Jim?
There's no magic bullet either.
Great. Next topic we want to talk about that we've seen when we look at the incident trends and fatalities, unfortunately, for many years, is we see a big disparity between industrial projects, large projects, that could have anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 craft workers on it, to our smaller commercial jobs. So, Jim, why is it the incident rates on larger projects different from commercial projects that we see around the country in general? What do you see as the common thread that's resulting in this disparity?
Well, the work is almost the same, but where I see two major differences. On large industrial projects, the owner of the project that has hired the construction manager, and the construction manager has then hired all the contractors, the owner is much more involved and demands much more safety than an owner in a commercial project. We hardly ever see the owner in a commercial project. But on an industrial project, the refineries or the steel mills or wherever it happens to be, they are very, very involved, and they demand excellence. And if you're not willing to give them excellence, you won't be there very long. In addition to that, in the industrial projects, there is a plan from the start, usually initiated by the owner and the construction manager, that every single management person and foreman knows exactly what's expected of them. There are no surprises. because they're in a situation where they've done it over and over again in the past, and they understand what is going to be successful. For instance, in a steel mill, if you're doing a turnaround in a steel mill, or if you're doing something in a refinery, these go on all the time. They understand, and the contractors that work in there, they have to follow that plan.
So you're saying it's site supervision that's one of the distinguishing differences between the industrial projects and the commercial projects, where the first line supervisors are told what's expected of them. And this could be the foreman, general foreman, or superintendents. And they seem to know on these industrial projects, at least by my evaluations, that they know what's expected of them, not every week or every month, but every day. And that's what I'm hearing you saying.
Absolutely. And on these industrial projects, there is just no question that every contractor has to do regular and frequent inspections by them on their portion of the work. They understand they're responsible for the safety of their workforce, and those inspections are documented, and they go up to the construction manager and to the owner. The owner sees them on a daily basis. And this just there are no excuses, and at least from my experience in the steel industry, there's just no excuses for not doing the right thing in the industrial project. Not saying that commercial projects, a lot of commercial projects are going this way.
Yes.
But they aren't as sophisticated, in my opinion, as to the safety aspects as a lot of the industrial projects are.
And we're going to talk more about site supervision here shortly, okay, and the importance. Whether you're on a commercial job or an industrial job, it's that site supervision where that foreman, general foreman, or superintendent has direct control over the work that's going on. And that's where we're going to focus a lot of our discussion and a lot of our attention. The next item we want to talk about is recognizing project owner safety requirements and also regulatory requirements. And Jim, I have to say that I receive a lot of phone calls from people wanting to know, do I really have to wear high visibility vest on this project? Do I really have to wear eye protection all day? Do I have to wear the steel-toed boots that they are supplying me? And so many times I find out that they don't look at the contract safety specifications during the bidding project. And then later on, when our iron workers mobilize on the project, they find out later some of these site-specific safety requirements after the fact. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We get to a project, again, we've talked about it. OSHA's the standard of care, whether it's a state plan OSHA or it's federal OSHA, and they have minimum requirements. And those are mainly well recognized by all the contractors, but at a lot of contractors and owners now in the commercial side, at least the construction managers, are setting their own standards that exceed what you would see in OSHA. So now we're seeing the requirements for steel-toed boots or even metatarsal guarded boots. We're seeing the requirements for everybody is going to be wearing high visibility vests, even though that's not a standard anywhere in OSHA. Everybody is going to be wearing safety glasses, and there's not going to be any tint to the safety glasses when you're outside. They set these standards, and they're expected to be enforced. And you have to be knowledgeable as a contractor going in there, and you should know this. You should know what's going to be required for you when you're in the bid process.
Well, they have to put a price to this, don't they, Jim?
They have to.
And there's nothing worse than finding out that you have to do these things after the fact, because it goes straight to the bottom line. So on this particular issue, the importance here would be to review those project safety specifications during the bidding stage to ensure that you've identified their safety requirements as well as the cost factor that you have to put into your bid to comply with them.
And it's over and over we see it. I mean, subpart R says 15 feet or 30 feet in some cases, but there's many projects right now that are 6 feet. That's just the way it's going to be. They can set their parameters. They can, the construction manager can say, this is the way it's going to be on this project. I understand what OSHA says, but we're going to be better than OSHA. We're going to do more than OSHA requires. As everybody knows, ladder safety, it's a big deal. But there's no requirement anywhere in OSHA to tie off to a portable ladder. But sometimes contractors and construction managers can make the requirement, and that will be what is the norm at that job.
So it must be understood that a project owner or a general contractor or even a subcontractor, one of our signatory contractors, can adopt more stringent safety policies, correct?
OSHA encourages it, to
Yes.
be honest with you.
So we just can't rely on minimum standards by the Department of Labor as being the rule of the land. We have to recognize and comply with project contracts as well as what our employer is requiring.
Well, the world-class companies out there recognize that a lot of the OSHA standards haven't been updated since they were adopted in 1971. Perfect example is scaffolding. Scaffolding, the scaffolding standard is a standard that was adopted from an ANSI standard that was around prior to 1971, and they just took it in as a whole and brought it over to OSHA. And we're dealing with the scaffolding requirements that were, in our terms today, ancient. And many companies realize that, and they put in more strict requirements, stricter requirements that and requirements that make sense to keep people safe.
Thanks, Jim. Going on to addressing regulatory issues. It must be clearly understood of who is responsible by law, by the Department of Labor, when it comes to initiating and maintaining safety programs. And we have a slide here. It just has 4 basic employer requirements, and I just want to hit on these just for a minute here, such as it shall be the responsibility of the employer to initiate and maintain such programs as may be necessary to comply with this part. So clearly it is the responsibility of the employer, not the local union, okay, not the apprenticeship program, not their safety consultant. It's the employer that's on the bottom line responsibility. Correct.
That is correct. And OSHA defines an employer as a contractor or a subcontractor. That is what an employer is in construction.
Yes. And another item that we're going to talk about in more detail later is one of the programs employers have to initiate and maintain are frequent and regular job site inspections, and they must be done by competent persons that are designated by the employers.
Absolutely. These top 3 standards that you're looking at were adopted from something that was called and is called the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. It was in place before OSHA was brought into being in December of 1970. And when that happened, that was for federal projects. And there was Section 107 of that contract, that act, that was taken out of that act and put into the OSHA standards. And you're now looking at the 3 requirements from the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act from federal contracts that has been implemented by the agency, by OSHA today. And so what they're saying is if you develop a safety program, when you develop a safety program, it must provide that every employer on that job does a frequent and regular inspection of its job site, its materials, and its equipment. And OSHA looks for that. And if it's not in writing, in their mind, it didn't happen. You must document it. and you should be doing it every single day.
And we'll get into workplace inspections in more detail later on in this series. But the next item we want to focus on is another employer requirement when it talks to training and instruction. And the standard requires that the employer shall instruct each employee in the recognition and avoidance of unsafe conditions and the regulations applicable to his work environment to control or eliminate any hazards or other exposures to injury and illness. So Jim, here again we're in a position where the employer is in a position to instruct their employees. It's not the local union that's instructing employees. It's not the safety consultants that may be there, their insurance carriers or whoever. It's that employer that has to instruct them on what their policies and procedures are.
This is OSHA's general training requirement. And the employer here is the contractor or subcontractor. It is not even the construction manager or the owner. It's the employer of the exposed employees must do this. And there is some training, of course, that, for instance, the ironworkers provide that's been accepted by the Department of Labor. But that doesn't eliminate the requirement of an employer to instruct each employee site-specifically in the recognition of avoidance of the unsafe conditions at that site.
Jim, one of the examples I want to use on this particular point is there was a situation, an actual case, where an employer was cited for failing to instruct his employees or have a written safety program. And in this case, the contractor's position was, well, I hire union ironworkers out of a union hall that have gone through an apprenticeship training program. And in this particular case, the administrative law judge came back and said this, that the employer in this case cannot blindly rely on training that was provided through a hiring hall or something like that. They have to initiate programs themselves. And we're going to talk about this in more depth later on because you're correct. Our apprenticeship programs do provide qualified training and certified training that's recognized by the Department of Labor. But it's important for our employers to take advantage of that, to know if that training has been provided and to document it. It's their job to ensure that they've had the training and to also maintain that documentation. And later on in this series, we'll have the Executive Director of the National Training Fund, Lee Worley, that will talk about what the National Training Fund provides as far as the list of certifications, the training, and also the apprenticeship tracking system that allows every ironworker to have a card that has a list of every certification and training program that they've completed through our international association. So that's going to help to alleviate that case example that I just mentioned.
And that's true. I mean, even the OSHA 10 or the OSHA 30, the apprenticeship training, they can't anticipate what's going to happen or what does happen on every job. With site-specific, again, coming back to site-specific hazards, employers have to instruct their employees in how to deal with that.
Yes.
And that's really basic OSHA or Safety 101.
Yes. Now, here's an example of a state-approved OSHA plan that they clearly outline what the employer is responsible for. And here, this state-approved OSHA plan requires that these programs be in writing. They want to see them. And they talk about identify persons that has the authority for implementing the program. They identify systems for ensuring employees comply with the safety and health programs. What is your system for communicating to your employees? How are you doing this? And include procedures for periodic inspections to identify unsafe acts or unsafe conditions in the workplace. It's spelled out. And it may be in more detailed around the country under different state-approved OSHA plans that may be more stringent. But this is just an example of how things could be a little bit different around the country.
And this is a great example of what we're discussing because many people don't even realize that OSHA doesn't even require, federal OSHA does not require a written program. I've never seen a good program that wasn't in writing and site specific, but there may be one out there, but I haven't seen it. What this state plan is saying is exactly what we're saying. You need to communicate to the workers what the hazards are and how to deal with them. It's really fairly simple.